I always know a debate is going sideways when somebody keeps getting asked direct questions and suddenly starts yelling, "What about Biden?" instead of actually defending the policy. And John Iadarola absolutely hammered this CNN panel over Trump's controversial January 6th compensation fund. Welcome back, everybody. Make sure you subscribe, comment where you're watching from, and let me know your thoughts because this conversation exposed just how shaky some of these MAGA defenses really are. CNN's panel on Donald Trump's proposed January 6th compensation fund quickly turned into a brutal takedown of MAGA talking points when John Iadarola directly challenged the corruption surrounding the proposal. Filling in for Caitlin Collins, Alex Michelson hosted Iadarola alongside conservative strategist Katie Zachariah, but the debate immediately exposed a huge divide. While Zachariah defended the fund as justice for January 6 defendants, John kept focusing on the real issue, billions of taxpayer dollars with little oversight potentially benefiting people tied to Trump and the Capitol riot. He called it one of the most openly corrupt ideas of the Trump era. And instead of addressing those concerns directly, Zachariah repeatedly fell back on the usual MAGA response, blaming Biden, Merrick Garland, and the so-called weaponization of government. The clearest clash came over January 6th itself, when Zachariah claimed peaceful protesters were unfairly targeted. But John pushed back hard, pointing out that MAGA figures constantly make those claims without naming actual innocent people jailed for doing nothing wrong. I've definitely got some thoughts on how quickly this panel turned into pure deflection mode, so stay tuned because we're about to get into it together.
I'll bring in my political sources, conservative legal and political strategist Katie Zachariah on the right, and host of the Damage Report on the Young Turks Network, John Iadarola on the left. Great to see both of you. Welcome. John, is this good strategy for Democrats, the idea of impeachment?
I agree with Josh that it should be aired out in public, and it is possible that this is the sort of thing, especially involving the J6ers, that could potentially break through. And I think it's wildly unconstitutional, illegal. As a patriotic American, it makes me sick that they would do this. That said, there's an opportunity cost to focusing on this over some issues that are already proven to be dragging on Donald Trump's numbers. The war in Iran, gas prices, the Epstein scandal. Like, if you are focusing on this, you're not focusing on those things. There's a chance that this could break through, or it could be one of those things that to us is super relevant, but could be a little bit abstract to regular people.
Your thoughts?
Well, I take first issue with the GOP senators and Senator Cruz. I would have loved to see that outrage to Merrick Garland during the Biden era home, and I saw none of that outrage or pull.
Well, they weren't big fans of Merrick Garland, were they?
But they weren't. Torching him like they said they were to acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. Look, there is precedent. Obama had a precedent. It's called Keep Siegel. It was a $760 million fund. And it was people who had grievances against the federal government. President Trump and his family are not receiving any money from this. They have put their hands up. This is for other people who have claims. And there are many already that have stepped up to the plate. This isn't a payout to his family as he said, this is a payout to people who have been that their justice system has been weaponized against them.
Do you think that folks involved with January 6th deserve a payout from the federal government?
If they were targeted, and I think there is a delineation on violent offenders and people that were targeted just for being at the Capitol. There are people that were there that were not violent, that were targeted, their businesses were targeted, and then they either were imprisoned or fined, and I think they had a hard time getting out from under that. They should be able to receive compensation if there wasn't due process on were you violent, how did you participate in this? Now, if you were violent and you did something at the Capitol that needs evaluation, sure, but this is a huge difference, and they're taking one small group of people and casting a big net around everyone, and I think that really undermines the fact that there was a weaponized judicial system under Biden, and it needs to be addressed.
Is this a good use of $2 billion of taxpayer money?
It's better than more ballrooms, I suppose. But no, it's a terrible use. And people keep throwing the $2 billion around. There's nothing in the document that says it's limited to $1.8 billion. It could be whatever they want it to be, and they could change their mind over time. There's a lot that's being colloquially thrown around that doesn't actually bear out in the document. It's not actually a settlement. It's not actually for $1.8 billion. There's going to be effectively no oversight whatsoever. Even if there is an audit, then Todd Blanche he appoints the person who does the audit. He can veto the audit if he wants to. This is one of the most transparent and corrupt acts that I've seen. And in this presidency, that's actually a difficult standard.
You're shaking your head.
Well, that's not correct. There are 5 people that review the cases. The president that he can fire them, but they have to be hired the same. And there's a lot of oversight going on in this, and it's not $2 billion, it's not $1.8 billion. It is a restricted fund. It's $1.776 billion.
But that isn't an actual document. That's just a thing they've said.
And any funds after 2028 that are not used will be reverted back to the federal government. Unlike Biden's term, where $300 million went to NGOs that didn't even apply for their grievances. So there is a big difference, and there will be oversight. And I think Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche will make sure of that.
Another big story that seems to be breaking tonight is the war with Iran and this debate that seems to be happening within the president's cabinet of whether to move forward with more military action. We have seen that this military action has been deeply unpopular for the American public. Do you think it potentially is worth it to start up the war with Iran again?
Well, look, we have no visibility on the documents and that he's able to see to make these types of decisions. If you're reading the tea leaves, he's spoken with all of the world, the leaders in the surrounding region, Saudi, UAE, Qatar. What I'm really noticing is this restriction on the Taiwan weapon deal and what kind of pressure China is going to put on Iran here. Now, what that says to me is he's looking for avenues to put pressure on Iran rather than engage in further war. And if you have these surrounding countries that are able to help do that and leverage this, I think we can arrive somewhere. Now, is it a good idea? I can't definitively answer that because the president has...
Do you think the war is going well?
Look, the president is dealing with a regime that wants to build a nuclear weapon, and I think we can all agree the world will not be safer if Iran has a nuclear weapon. Is it unpopular? Yes, but sometimes doing the hard thing is very unpopular.
John.
Yeah, I think it's wildly unpopular. I think both of the way that it's been persecuted, the way that it was messaged around, and also that it directly contradicts basically everything that Donald Trump was saying when he campaigned. I think that's why not just people are frustrated, but particularly independents who crossed over to Trump in 2024, and plenty of Republicans, especially younger Republicans, that absolutely despise this war. I think that Donald Trump should find some way to wind it down. I think that if blowing Iran up was going to solve the problem, it would have solved the problem the last times that we decimated them and sent all their ships to the bottom of the sea. We've done this before. It didn't get them to fold. I mean, maybe he'll make a case for how this is going to be different, but I haven't heard anything. I don't expect it.
Why do you think this is going to be different?
Well, I want to highlight that President Trump in his first term had sanctioned Iran, and he pulled out of the nuclear deal, and he was able to really pull back. And Hezbollah was defunded, Hamas was running out of money, and then October 7th happens when Biden rescinds all of these programs, all of the sanctions that President Trump had. So here we are 4 or 5 years later having to fix problems that President Trump was on the path to fixing. So yes, ex post facto, it's not fun to have to go in and say, look, you can't build a nuclear weapon. We were on the way to doing that. Biden didn't continue that. So I think it's absolutely necessary for President Trump to continue to say what he did say, which is you may not have a nuclear weapon.
Last sentence to you. Is this Biden's fault?
Why not? Sure. I wasn't a huge fan of Biden. Put that on him.
Okay, there you go. I guess we found something you guys agreed on. John, Katie, great to see both of you. Have a great weekend. We appreciate it. Up next,
What made this CNN segment so revealing is that it exposed one of the defining characteristics of modern MAGA politics. There is effectively no level of corruption, abuse of power, or blatant self-dealing that cannot be excused as long as Donald Trump is the one doing it. That's the core issue here. Because think about how absurd this entire conversation actually is when stripped of the partisan spin. We are talking about a proposed compensation fund connected to January 6 defendants, people tied to an attack on the United States Capitol, with vague oversight, unclear limitations, political appointees controlling enforcement, and enormous potential for abuse. Under any normal presidency, this would dominate the political conversation for weeks. Imagine for 1 second if Barack Obama had proposed a multi-billion-dollar compensation system for people arrested during riots tied to Democratic causes, while giving his own attorney general broad authority over the review process. Republicans would have declared it the largest corruption scandal in American history. Fox News would run non-stop countdown clocks. Congressional hearings would begin immediately. Conservatives would scream about dictatorship, bribery, and abuse of taxpayer money 24 hours a day. But because it's Donald Trump, suddenly MAGA commentators are pretending this is perfectly normal governance. That hypocrisy is exactly what John Iadarola was exposing throughout this debate, and it's why Katie Zachariah kept falling back on the same exhausted MAGA fallback, what about Biden? That's not an accident anymore. It's the entire strategy. Modern Trumpism survives politically by eliminating accountability through permanent deflection. The goal is never to prove Trump innocent. The goal is simply to muddy the waters enough that nothing matters anymore. Every scandal becomes both sides. Every abuse becomes, well, Democrats did something too. Every ethical violation gets buried under an avalanche of grievance politics and conspiracy rhetoric. And over time, that mentality becomes incredibly dangerous for a democracy because it destroys the basic concept of standards. That's what people are reacting to now.
Because this is no longer just about disagreements over tax policy, immigration, or foreign affairs. The concern many Americans have is much deeper than that. It's the growing perception that MAGA politics no longer recognizes any limiting principle at all. There is no institutional line Trump cannot cross without his supporters immediately rationalizing it afterward. That's why the exchange over oversight was so important. John wasn't simply criticizing the existence of the fund itself, he was pointing out something much bigger. The structure appears intentionally designed to avoid meaningful accountability. And the responses from Zachariah only reinforced that concern. Because instead of clearly explaining strong, independent safeguards, she essentially argued that Trump officials could be trusted to police themselves. That's the exact opposite of how democratic oversight is supposed to work. The entire purpose of oversight is to ensure political leaders cannot simply appoint loyalists to investigate themselves while controlling the outcome. But Trumpism increasingly treats loyalty to Trump as more important than institutional integrity itself. That's why so many of these conversations feel surreal. MAGA supporters are often defending behavior that they themselves would have considered authoritarian 10 years ago. And people notice that contradiction, especially after January 6th. Because one of the strangest rewrites happening in American politics right now is the attempt to transform January 6th defendants into sympathetic victims of government oppression. That's what Zachariah was trying to do with the peaceful protesters framing. The problem is that the public watched January 6th happen live. Americans saw the mob. They saw the violence. They saw officers attacked. They saw windows smashed. They saw lawmakers evacuated. They saw people chanting about hanging the vice president. And they saw the entire effort unfold because Trump refused to accept losing an election. That memory still matters. So when MAGA figures vaguely claim there were countless innocent protesters unfairly imprisoned, people naturally ask the obvious question. Okay, where are they? Who are these people?
The reality is that most of the high-profile January 6 prosecutions involved people who absolutely did commit crimes. That's why juries convicted them, that's why plea deals happened, that's why so much footage existed. MAGA media keeps trying to reframe the entire event as harmless political dissent because admitting the truth would mean confronting the reality that the movement crossed a historic line on January 6th. And Trump's response since then has only deepened that crisis. Instead of distancing himself from the attack, he's steadily moved toward glorifying the participants, reframing them as martyrs, and now apparently attempting to create financial structures that reward or rehabilitate them politically. That is an astonishing development in American history. And it's important not to normalize how extreme that actually is. Then the conversation moved to Iran, and once again, the same pattern emerged. Every problem somehow became Joe Biden's fault, even when Trump himself is currently in power and directly responsible for current policy decisions. That's another major feature of modern MAGA rhetoric. Trump is simultaneously portrayed as all-powerful and never responsible for anything. If the economy is good, Trump gets credit instantly. If markets rise, Trump is a genius. If foreign adversaries back down, Trump is a master negotiator. But if wars escalate, if instability grows, if inflation rises, if scandals erupt, suddenly everything traces back to Biden, Obama, the deep state, or unnamed globalists. That's not coherent political analysis. That's personality cult politics. And John Iadarola did a good job exposing that contradiction without becoming performative about it. One reason he works well on panels like this is because he doesn't overcomplicate the argument. He keeps dragging the discussion back to observable reality. Are there safeguards or not? Is there oversight or not? Are there actual innocent protesters you can identify or not? Did Trump campaign as an anti-war candidate or not? Those simple factual questions become incredibly difficult for MAGA defenders because the movement increasingly relies on emotional narratives rather than consistency. And politically, Democrats should absolutely understand the opportunity sitting in front of them here. What exactly happened to them? Because conservatives constantly speak in broad emotional generalities while rarely presenting concrete examples that match the persecution narrative they're selling. And there's a reason for that.
Not because impeachment itself is magically effective. The public is already numb to impeachment proceedings after years of partisan warfare. But hearings, investigations, subpoenas, document releases, witness testimony, and relentless exposure of corruption absolutely can shape public opinion over time. That's especially true when tied to economic frustration, because average Americans are struggling financially while constantly watching political elites enrich themselves, protect their allies, and manipulate institutions for personal gain. That frustration cuts across party lines. Even many independents and former Trump voters are becoming exhausted by the nonstop chaos, scandals, and self-serving behavior. And the danger for Republicans is that the anti-establishment outsider image becomes harder to maintain when your administration increasingly looks like a machine designed to funnel power and protection toward loyalists. That contradiction eventually catches up to movements, especially when the moral double standards become impossible to ignore. Because at the end of the day, this is what many Americans increasingly see. Republicans who spent decades screaming about law and order are now defending Capitol rioters. Politicians who claim to worship the Constitution are rationalizing attacks on democratic institutions. Media figures who once warned about government corruption now defend opaque political funds with barely any oversight because their side controls it. That collapse of principle is what people find disturbing. And the more establishment Republicans and MAGA commentators normalize it, the more independent voters begin questioning whether the movement still believes in democratic accountability at all. That's the real political danger for Trumpism moving forward. Not just that people disagree with the policies, but that more Americans are beginning to believe the movement has abandoned the idea that rules should apply equally to everyone, especially Donald Trump himself.